This is a world where empires were crushed beneath the rampant growth known as the Verdancy. Hundreds of years after the collapse, what remains are scattered settlements across the dense treetop waves. Your players will take on the roles of wild sailors, part of a motley crew, traveling to places both known and unknown to be found upon this endless treescape they call the Wild Sea. That is the premise of the Wildsea role-playing game from Quillhound Studios and Mythworks. And I'll share my review right after this. Happy New Year, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I dive into today's review, I do want to mention if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG, and do so simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a small portion of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal or become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes. Also, down in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. Today is New Year's Day, and not only will we continue the Gaming Gang 12 days of reviews, we're going to start off with a good one. So I'll be sharing my thoughts about The Wildsea from Quillhound Studios and Mythworks. Created by Felix Isaacs, this 367-page hardcover with PDF carries an MSRP of $59.99. If you want to just grab the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $24.99. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got The Wildsea. A couple of things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, the fine folks over at Mythworks were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. First thing we're going to do is take a look at the credits. They are found at the back of the book. And as you can tell, this is presented in a landscape format. That's why I'm zoomed out a little more than I normally would be. So a lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life. So let's make sure that we give credit where credit is due. Let's pop back up to the front of the book. The Wildsea is a post-apocalyptic fantasy role-playing game. It is firmly in the camp of storytelling games. So this is a game that is more concerned with the characters, their relationships, and how they interact with the world and what kind of impact they have on their world, as opposed to min-maxing and making sure to get as many experience points as you can and gathering up gold and things like that. So I want to make sure right up front, people do understand that this is heavily into narrative as opposed to being driven by crunchy mechanics. The author says that this is inspired by role-playing games such as Belly of the Beast, 13th Age, as well as Band of Blades. I'll also say that I can see DNA from Powered by the Apocalypse as well. So the setting of the Wildsea is not necessarily Earth. it's never really made clear where this is taking place. My assumption is it is not Earth because of the various different species we have available for the players to utilize for their characters, as well as the Firefly, the GM in this case, to utilize as NPCs. So we have 7 different species to choose from. We've got the Ardent, who are descendants of humanity. We have the Ectus, who are these big cacti folk. We have the Gau, who are actually fungus. So, and then we have the Zelicrae, one of the absolute coolest of the species that are in this. They are colonies of spiders that have joined to take up a form, and they tend to live in these like wrappings and rags and things like that. Really, really wild. We've got the Ironbound, who are actually the souls of destroyed ships. We have the Ketra, who are also descendants of humanity, but they come from beneath the treetop. And then we have the Mothrin, who are moth folk, who have short lifespans. I have to say that as far as role-playing games go, I found the Wildsea to be one of the most creative settings I have ever encountered. It is just a blast to read the book and to explore the various different things that are going on with the different settlements, with these different species, and really, really nicely done. I can see why this has won multiple awards. Now, I will try to stay relatively spoiler-free. So I don't want to ruin the surprises as a game master reading this book. There are a lot of fun things you're going to discover as you're reading on through. So let's talk about mechanics. As I have already pointed out, this is heavily in the camp of narrative games. So as far as mechanics go, very, very simple. The same mechanics carry over to just about anything you're trying to do. So it uses a 6-sided dice pool. The most any player is ever going to roll in one roll is going to be 6. And you create the dice pool by taking an edge. If the character has an edge which is applicable to what they're trying to do, they're going to get a die. If they happen to have a skill, aspect, language that is applicable, they can get up to 3 more dice. And then if the Firefly feels that the character has any sort of advantage, something in their favor going on, they might get up to 2 more dice. So right there, that is your total of 6. So when a player is attempting to do something with their character, they're going to take their dice pool and they're going to roll, and they're hoping to get 6s. 6s are a success. So what you end up doing is you just take the highest die out of what you've rolled. So this 5 here doesn't matter. The 1 here does not matter. Now, what would matter is if I rolled a couple of 6s, because this would mean there's a twist that's going to take place. Anytime doubles are rolled, there is going to be a twist. So result of 6 is a success. There are no complications. Everything's Jake. Hooray. Crowd goes wild. 4 or 5, there's a success to what you're attempting to do, but there's also a complication. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's some really dire consequence. Maybe what the player character was attempting to accomplish took longer than expected. Easy peasy there. 1 to 3, failure. Womp, womp, womp. Now, as far as these twists, one of the cool aspects when a twist happens, just use the 6s again. It is not up to the Firefly what the twist is. The twist is up to another player. Not the player who is rolling dice, not the game master, but it's in the hands of another player. I thought that was very cool. I thought that is a nice way to make sure that everyone's staying involved. Something else that's discussed in the Wildsea is focus. So all of the players should have their time to shine, and the Firefly should actually be tracking what's going on with focus so they can see, oh, hey, you know what? I see Bob over there. They've got to make 3 or 4 action rolls. They've had a reaction to something, but then Andy over here really hasn't done much. Let's make sure, this is all going on in their head, not verbally. They're thinking to themselves, okay, so I have to make sure that we get Andy involved. I'm going to throw some things at them next opportunity I have when we move on to another scene. So this is a scene-based role-playing game. We also have montages. We have journeys that take place. Something else that plays a very large role in the Wildsea are tracks. So with tracks, it's essentially the Firefly is going to come up with a track. There's circles that are connected. In fact, I'll go back to give you a quick peek. And it might just mean that the players, their characters have to accomplish certain things to mark off these circles as far as these tracks. Now, it might be multiple tracks. It could just be a single track. We also have tracks in play when it comes to the player characters. I'll go to a character sheet here. Because when a character takes damage, they're actually going to mark off things that they've got. So as an example, let's say a player character's got a heavy coat. Well, that heavy coat would have a couple of circles on it for its track that when a player character would take damage, let's say they took 2 damage, that player could mark off those 2 circles and say, okay, the coat absorbed that damage. Now, if they don't have anything that's going to be able to absorb that damage, they're actually going to have to mark off from their aspects and from their edges. Now, an interesting thing about the Wildsea that some game masters may not be too fond of is the fact that no matter how much damage gets dealt out to a player character, it is up to the player if that character dies. So if the player just does not want to let their character give up the ghost, they can just keep on trucking. I get it. Some game masters out there are not going to appreciate that. Once again, you got to keep in mind, the main focus of the Wildsea is on the story. It's on the crew. It's on the player characters and how they interact with each other and their world and what difference are they making in the world. There are also things known as mires, which actually will have negative effects on the player characters where, it's a dangerous world out there. It is not a peaceful world out there. So it starts to maybe wear on the player characters. There are a lot of ways for you to get rid of your mire, but that will have a negative effect. Something else that we've got as far as your action resolution, even in combat, you're still going to have your dice pool. You're going to roll. You're looking for the 6s. And, 4 or 5 if you can't get the 6. You can also have difficulty cut dice. So as an example, let's say you had a pool of 4 dice that you're getting ready to roll, and the Firefly says, well, what you're trying to do is actually quite a bit more difficult than you may have expected it to be. You're going to cut a die. There you go. Easy enough. You're going to cut that die out. Now, you might have a situation in combat where you're trying to call your shot. Same thing. If you're trying to hit a specific location, if you're trying to do a specific thing, you're going to cut a die out. Pretty easy. So the core mechanics are simple, right? 6, hooray! Everything's just wonderful. Nice going, big thumbs up. 4 or 5, cool, yeah, all right. We were able to get it done. But, and of course, 1 through 3 is a failure. And then, of course, you have that additional doubles where you can get the twist. Interestingly enough, I did not encounter where the twist should be positive or negative. Now, maybe I somehow missed it, but I would think the twist would be positive if you've succeeded, and the twist would be negative if you failed. Now, I don't think that would be set in stone because, once again, remember, the twist isn't up to the player. It's not up to the game master. It's up to another player at the table. So I thought that was pretty cool. All right. So we get into our different character elements. So as an example, we've got skills. So some of the skills out there, we have brace, a skill of defense, hard-headedness, and immobility. Use brace to weather the ravages of weather, exhaustion, and those that want to see you fall. This might take the form of clinging to life in the tough situations, shrugging off attempts to manipulate or confuse you, blocking or parrying an incoming attack, keeping your footing through a storm or root quake, shouldering your way through a crowd. So we've got a variety of different skills, very broad, and they also have a variety of different applications there as well. So then, of course, we do have the skill ranks. We have languages. So the languages can also give you additional dice. Languages don't necessarily just mean that you can speak that culture's language. It means that you're also immersed in that culture. You have knowledge about that culture. So you can use language to make friends or learn additional information. So language isn't just, oh, well, I speak Goblin. No, not at all. It's more how much about that culture and its lore, as well as communicating within that culture, and how fluent you are in that language will also be important as well, because you can have a smattering or you could be fluent. So we do have ranks on the language too. So as far as the characters themselves, we have the bloodlines, we have origins, and then we have posts. So first off, we start with our bloodlines. Each of the bloodlines will get a couple of pages. So as I mentioned before, we've got let's go back real quick, the Ardent, who are humans or descendants of humans. We've got the Ectus, who are these large cacti folk. We've got the Gau, who are actually made of fungi. The Ironbound, who are like resurrected pieces of ships. I said really wild stuff. We've got the Ketra. They are descended from humans, but there is this sap essentially, which the Verdancy gives off. And it's something that the wild sailors have to be really careful about because it's kind of acidic. And if you're exposed to too much of it, it could like lead to mutations, things like that. Well, the Ketra actually are humans who lived below the canopy. So at one point, it was thought that, everything below the treescape was destroyed, was lost. Not the case. So they are the descendants of those human survivors who were in, mountaintops or mines and underground, things like that. Then we got the Mothrin. And even though they do have wings, they can't fly. They can glide, but they can't fly. And then we have the Zelicrae. As I mentioned before, these are like so cool. This is so wild, right? So they're colonies of spiders that have joined together to become like a single consciousness. And as you can see, this is all like wrapped up and kind of clothed, but they're all like spiders. And then, of course, we've got aspects. So with the aspects, when you're beginning with your character, you're going to choose 2 of these aspects. And of course, we also do have some information. If you want to just jump right on in, it's our quick start kit. Sort of like, okay, choose an edge, Here's your languages and skills, resources, drive, mire, boom, go. And then, of course, you would need to choose your 2 aspects. But just kind of, if you wanted to, as the Firefly, if you wanted to kind of maybe do some pre-gens, just introduce players to this. And then we'll have our origins, which are essentially the backgrounds for the characters. So we've got the bloodline, your species, then you got your origin, your background, and then we will have our post, which is sort of like the character's class. What do they do on the ship? Like Corsair. They're fighters tasked with protecting their ships from the myriad dangers of the sea. The dredger, brave explorers with an eye for value. So once again, you'll get to choose a couple of aspects. So your starting character will have 4 aspects. And of course, there are rules for advancement. And as the player characters advance, they will get new aspects as well. So we've got quite a few different posts here. Quite a few origins. There are more posts than anything. So the word bearer. The routes may be longer and a lot more dangerous than in the pre-verdant times, but the post still needs to get from A to B. So they are the post-apocalyptic male person. This is what it is. All right, then we have rules for creating your ship. So the ship is essentially a character that the players are all going to share. Next, we'll move into the GM portion of the book with the Firefly's Guide. Going to talk about planning, how do you create a tone, certain themes you might want to look into, how to use action rolls, positive, negative outcomes, montages, because we do have scenes, we have montages, and then we have journeys. So the montages usually utilize like in downtime where each of the players gets to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to be doing that. So rather than sitting and role playing everything out, it's just sort of, okay, so you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this. It's normally taking place during a time where there's, no enemies about, kind of a peaceful time. Then we are going to start getting into our hazards. So this is where we're going to have our bestiary. And then we wrap up the book with a guide to various different places. So we get a gazetteer that's going to tell us all about these various different settlements. Now, one of the things that is a big factor in the Wildsea is nothing is permanent. So it's not unusual to have the Verdancy just suddenly swallow up a settlement, or maybe there's a void that opens up in the canopy and the player characters and their crew would be able to go underneath the canopy and explore. So that's something I thought was very, very cool. Now, something else, open flame is forbidden. I wonder why, huh? But I guess as far as the actual trees that make up the treescape, the waves, they are very flammable. So, of course, there's actually, if I remember right, I think it's to the north, you can see smoke because there's the conflagration, I think it's called, if I remember correctly, where ever since the Verdancy began, someone had the bright idea of, well, let's burn it. Well, that fire just continues to burn hundreds of years later. So like I said, we're going to wrap up with a section all about different areas and some resources like alternate twist rules. Something else I really liked about reading through the Wildsea is how many optional aspects there are to the game. So there are certain topics, certain themes in the Wildsea that may not necessarily be appropriate for everybody. So there's some discussion about how to leave things out. We also have some different optional rule sets. I mean, not completely different, but kind of some tweaks here and there. And then, of course, we get a walkthrough. So this is kind of our reference here with the rules breakdown. And we get our Kickstarter backers. And of course, we already saw those credits. So that is a peek inside the Wildsea from Quillhound Studios and Mythworks. Let's swing back over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I think by now it's probably fairly apparent that I really, really dig the Wildsea, especially its setting. I gotta say, you are not going to find a role-playing game setting like this anywhere else. It is honestly one of the most creative and unique settings I have ever encountered in a role-playing game. And that's saying something, because I've been part of this hobby for, oh my gosh, going on now 45 years. Yeah, I know, I'm old. But as far as the mechanics, super easy for players and Fireflies to wrap their heads around. Now, because it is relatively rules light, that might turn some people off. Just like the fact that this is firmly entrenched in the camp of storytelling games, narrative games, as opposed to games where your players are going to be busy min-maxing all they can and trying to squeeze every last experience point out of the treasure they've just got. No, this is the sort of role-playing game that is far more concerned with the characters and their relationships with each other and with the rest of the crew and the world around them and what sort of impact they're going to make upon that world and the other people in their close proximity. If that's the sort of game that appeals to you and your players, regardless of the mechanics, you should definitely take a peek at the Wildsea. Now, speaking of mechanics, there are some options, there are some variants, there are some aspects to the gameplay that's not just as simple as rolling your pool of dice. Oh, did I get doubles? No. Okay. A 6. There we go. Success. 4, 5, success. But 1 through 3 failure. There are other things going on. It's not that simple, but still very, very rules light. And if you are married to a particular role-playing game system, but you're intrigued by the setting of the Wildsea, I should float out this idea. Keeping in mind that this game is all about storytelling, all about narrative, that also means things you would see big, long stat blocks for in other role-playing games is presented narratively for the game masters. So I could easily see converting over to whatever your favorite role-playing game system might happen to be. Percentile-based, 2d6, d20, what have you. Now, of course, would it be time-consuming? Hell yeah. But I'm telling you, this is a fantastic setting. The setting itself is, in my opinion, worth the price of admission. But then again, that's just me. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Wildsea a 9 out of 10. Setting is excellent. Mechanically, not necessarily my favorite, but I don't really have any issues with it. But wow, I can see why this has won awards. It is that good. And I should also point out, this is being supported by Mythworks. This is not one of those, wow, that's such a cool role-playing game and it won all these awards, and then you never see anything else for it ever again. That is not the case here. I do know there are some additional supplements that are available for the Wildsea. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it's supposed to let you know when I share not only videos such as this review, but also when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Happy New Year to everyone out there. Yes, the Gaming Gang 12 days of reviews will continue. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.